If you've played Skyrim, Oblivion, or any of the Elder Scrolls games, you've probably heard about the Divines, the Daedric Princes, Sovngarde, and maybe even names like Lorkhan. But have you ever wondered where any of this actually came from? Because the world of the Elder Scrolls wasn't always there. Before Skyrim, before Tamriel, before mankind, elves, dragons, or even the mortal world itself, there was the Orbis, and to understand the Elder Scrolls universe, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. Before we go any further, there's something important you need to understand about Elder Scrolls lore. There isn't always one completely agreed upon version of events. The different cultures of Tamriel have their own religions and creation stories. They sometimes use different names for the same concepts, and sometimes their stories outright contradict each other. So what we're going to follow is the basic creation story shared between many of these traditions. And that story begins with two opposing forces, Anu and Padomay. Anu represents things like order, stasis, and permanence. Padomay represents change, chaos, and possibility. And through the interaction of these two opposing forces came the foundation of existence itself, the Orbis. The easiest way to understand the Orbis is to think of it as the totality of existence. Everything we're eventually going to talk about, Mundus, Oblivion, Aetherius, Nirn, and Tamriel, exists within the greater cosmology of the Orbis. But there weren't humans or elves walking around yet. Instead, within this early existence, spirits began to take form. These were the Aethera, the original spirits, and among these spirits were beings whose names would eventually become extremely important to the people of Tamriel. Magnus, Akatosh, or Auriel, depending on the tradition we're talking about here, and most importantly for our story, Lorkhan. You see, Lorkhan had an idea. He proposed that the spirits create something new, a place unlike their own existence, a mortal plane. That plane would become Mundus, but creating Mundus came with a price. The spirits that participated poured their own power into its creation, and as Mundus began taking form, those spirits became diminished by what they had created. This is where one of the most important divisions in Elder Scrolls mythology begins. The spirits who participated in the creation of the mortal world became associated with what mortals would call the Aedra, or the ancestors. The Daedra, meanwhile, did not give themselves to the creation of Mundus in the same way. And that's part of the reason there's such a fundamental difference between the gods worshipped as the Divines and the Daedric princes encountered throughout the games. But there's a problem, depending on who you ask. The spirits may not have known exactly what they were signing up for. That's where the story gets interesting, because the people of Tamriel don't agree about Lorkhan. In many elven traditions, Lorkhan is essentially a trickster. He convinced the spirits to create Mundus without them fully understanding what creating a mortal world would cost them all. Their immortality and divine power were diminished, trapping their descendants in a world of limitation, suffering, and death. From that perspective, the creation of the world was a disaster, but mankind often sees Lorkhan very differently. Instead of being the villain who robbed the spirits of their divinity, Lorkhan can be seen as the reason mortal existence was even possible in the first place. And this disagreement between man and Mer, or the elves, becomes incredibly important throughout Elder Scrolls history. Was Mundus a prison, or was it an opportunity? The answer depends entirely on who is telling the story. Not every spirit stayed to finish the project. One of the most powerful spirits involved in designing Mundus was Magnus, but Magnus realized that the creation was costing them something, so he left. Magnus escaped Mundus and returned towards Aetherius, tearing a massive hole through the fabric separating the mortal realm from what laid beyond. That hole became the sun. Other spirits followed him. They became known as the magicka, and the smaller holes that they left behind became the stars. Which means that, according to the Elder Scrolls Cosmology, when you look into the night sky above Skyrim, those stars aren't simply distant balls of fire. They're openings into Aetherius, and through those openings, magicka flows into the mortal world. so every spell you've ever cast in an Elder Scrolls game ultimately connects back to the creation of the world itself. But Lorkhan couldn't simply walk away from what happened. After the creation of Mundus, he was punished. Once again, the exact story changes depending on the culture that's telling it, but one event appears again and again. Lorkhan's divine center, his heart, was torn from him. But the heart of Lorkhan couldn't simply just be destroyed, so it was cast away, and where the heart eventually landed, a massive volcano formed around it, and this was called the Red Mountain. If you've played Morrowind, you probably already know just how important that name actually is, because Lorkhan's heart didn't disappear from history. Thousands of years later, mortals would find it, and what they did with it would change Tamriel forever. But that's a story for much later. So now that the mortal world exists, where exactly are we now? This is where Elder Scrolls cosmology can get kinda confusing, so let's simplify it. At the largest level we have the Orbis, the greater totality of existence. Within this cosmology known as the Orbis are realms including Aetherius, Oblivion, and Mundus. Aetherius is the realm beyond, associated with the source of magicka. Oblivion is simply one giant version of hell. But it's not. It's made up of many different planes of existence. Many of the Daedric princes rule their own planes of oblivion. Mehrunes Dagon, for example, rules the Deadlands, the fiery realm you enter throughout the entire game of Oblivion. Then we have Mundus, the mortal realm created through the sacrifice of the spirits, and within Mundus is Nirn. Nirn is the world where the stories we know take place, and on Nirn is a continent you may recognize, Tamriel, and on Tamriel is something you will recognize, Skyrim. So if we zoom all the way out, the frozen mountains where the Dragonborn fights Alduin are just one tiny piece of something unimaginably larger. Skyrim is part of Tamriel. Tamriel is on Nirn. Nirn exists within Mundus, and Mundus is only one part of the greater Orbis. That's as simple as I can make it for you. And that's where our story really begins. The mortal world now exists, the gods have sacrificed part of themselves to create it, Lorkhan has paid the price for his role in its creation, and the beings living within this new world are about to begin building civilizations, religions, and eventually entire empires. But there's still a massive amount of time separating the creation of Nirn from the Tamriel we recognize today. Because before there was an empire, before there were Nords, Bretons, Dunmer, or Imperials as we know them, and long before anyone had ever heard the name Dragonborn, there was the Dawn era, and that's where we're going next.